What if everything you
It's all
believed
right.
about the worst day of your life was a
Just
lie?
breathe.
Vincent Romano had spent
I'm here
3
for
years
you.
visiting his son's grave every Sunday morning, placing fresh white roses on the cold marble stone. He'd memorized every curve of the carved letters that spelled out Michael Romano, beloved son, and the dates that marked a life cut tragically short at 22. Vincent had built walls around his heart, thick and unforgiving, the kind that turned a grieving father into the most feared man in the city. But on this ordinary Tuesday evening, as rain drummed against the hospital windows, a nurse with worn shoes and gentle eyes approached him in the corridor. Her voice barely rose above a whisper, trembling with both fear and something that looked like hope. "Mr. Romano," she said, clutching a faded photograph in her weathered hands, "your son is alive." Time stopped. The world tilted, and everything Vincent thought he knew shattered like glass. "Where are you watching from tonight?" Vincent Romano wasn't always the man people crossed the street to avoid. There was a time, years before, when he'd been a different person entirely. A father who coached Little League on Saturdays and made pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse on Sunday mornings. His wife Maria used to joke that their son Michael had inherited Vincent's stubborn streak and her warm heart, a combination that made the boy fearless and kind in equal measure. They'd been a happy family, the kind you'd see at neighborhood barbecues, waving from their front porch as kids rode bicycles down the quiet suburban street. But everything changed the night of Michael's 22nd birthday. He'd been driving home from celebrating with friends when another car ran a red light. The police came to the door at 2 a.m, their faces grave, their words careful and practiced. The other driver had fled the scene. Michael's car had gone off a bridge into the river. They found the vehicle 3 days later, crushed and empty, swept downstream by the current. After 2 weeks of searching, the authorities presented Vincent and Maria with what little evidence they'd recovered: Michael's wallet, his watch, a sneaker. The medical examiner explained that in cases like these, when a body isn't recovered from fast-moving water, families often never get that final closure. They held a memorial service with an empty casket. Maria never recovered from the grief. She'd sit in Michael's old bedroom for hours, holding his childhood blankets, whispering to photographs. Within a year, her heart simply gave out. The doctors called it a cardiac event, but Vincent knew better. She'd died of a broken heart, plain and simple, and when they lowered her casket into the ground beside the stone marker that bore their son's name, something in Vincent broke too. The gentle father disappeared. In his place emerged a man who'd learned that the world was cruel and random, that goodness didn't protect you, that everything you loved could be stolen in an instant. He'd always had connections. His grandfather had been involved in certain business dealings. His uncles ran operations that existed in the gray spaces of the law. Vincent dove into that world head first, driven by rage and pain he didn't know how to process. Within 2 years, he'd built an empire of protection rackets and underground gambling, becoming the kind of man whose name people spoke in hushed tones. He told himself he was creating order in a chaotic world, taking control where he'd once felt powerless. But really, he was just running from the gaping hole in his chest that his wife and son had left behind. Every Sunday, without fail, he visited their graves. He'd arrive at dawn when the cemetery was empty, when he could kneel in the wet grass and let himself remember who he used to be. He'd talk to them sometimes, updating Maria on neighborhood gossip she would have cared about, telling Michael about the Mets' latest losing streak. The groundskeeper learned to leave him alone during these visits. Even the hardest men need somewhere to be soft. On this particular Tuesday, Vincent hadn't planned on going anywhere near St. Catherine's Hospital. He'd been meeting with associates at a restaurant 3 blocks away when one of his men collapsed, a heart attack, sudden and severe. Vincent insisted they bring him to St. Catherine's, the closest emergency room, though his advisors suggested a private facility where questions wouldn't be asked. But something pulled Vincent there, some instinct he couldn't name. While his associate was being treated, Vincent paced the corridors, memories flooding back. This was where Maria had been brought that final time, where doctors had worked frantically to restart her heart. He'd walked these same halls 3 years ago, numb and hollow, signing papers that made him a widower. The antiseptic smell, the fluorescent lights, the sound of machines beeping in steady rhythms, it all came rushing back. He'd just turned down a quiet corridor, trying to escape the memories, when he saw her. A nurse, probably in her late 50s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her scrubs were faded from too many washings, her shoes scuffed and worn. She was standing very still, staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Recognition mixed with something that looked like terror and determination fighting for space on her weathered face. Their eyes met across the hallway. She took a step toward him, then hesitated. Her hands trembled as she reached into her pocket and pulled out what looked like a photograph, holding it against her chest like a shield. Vincent felt his pulse quicken. There was something in her eyes, something urgent and important, that made his throat tighten. She walked toward him slowly, each step deliberate, as if gathering courage. When she finally stood before him, close enough that he could see the fine lines around her eyes and the way her name tag read, Sarah Chen, RN, she took a shaky breath. Her voice was barely audible above the hospital's ambient noise. "Mr. Romano," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "Your son is alive." Vincent's first reaction wasn't hope. It was fury. His hand shot out and gripped the nurse's arm, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to hold her in place. "Who sent you?" he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Who put you up to this? Because if this is some kind of sick joke..." But Sarah Chen didn't flinch. She met his eyes with a steadiness that surprised him, and he saw no deception there, no cruel mockery. Only exhaustion and something that looked like relief. "Please," she whispered, pressing the photograph into his hand. "Just look, then decide if I'm lying." Her voice cracked on the last word. Vincent wanted to throw the photo away, to walk out of this hospital and never look back, but his fingers betrayed him, turning the worn picture over. The breath left his body. The face staring back at him was older, thinner, marked by suffering, but unmistakably his son. Michael's eyes, Maria's smile, but hollowed out and haunted. "Where did you get this?" Vincent's voice came out strangled. Sarah glanced nervously down the corridor. "Not here. Room 412. Please, Mr. Romano. I've been caring for him for 3 years. He doesn't remember anything. Not his name, not what happened. But I've seen your picture in the news, and I knew he was your son." She pressed a small key into his palm. "The back stairs. It's quieter. He's sleeping now, but you should see him before anyone else knows you're here." Then she turned and walked away quickly, her worn shoes squeaking on the linoleum. Vincent stood frozen in the corridor, his mind reeling. This wasn't possible. They'd had a memorial service. There'd been evidence. The police had closed the case. But his hands were shaking as he looked at the photograph again. And his heart, that heart he'd thought was dead and buried alongside Maria, was suddenly hammering against his ribs. He found the back stairwell, taking the steps 2 at a time despite his 58 years. Room 412 was at the end of a quiet wing, away from the main bustle of the hospital. The door was unlocked. Vincent pushed it open slowly, almost afraid of what he'd find. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of monitors and the fading daylight through half-closed blinds. In the bed, connected to various machines, lay a man. Vincent approached slowly, his legs feeling like lead. The man's face was turned toward the window. Scars marked his forehead and jaw. His hair was longer than Michael used to wear it, shot through with premature gray. But when Vincent stood beside the bed and looked down, really looked, he felt his knees buckle. It was Michael. Older, damaged, changed, but Michael. The same slight crook in his nose from the time he'd broken it playing high school football. The same small birthmark just above his left eyebrow. The same long fingers that had once learned piano because Maria insisted. Vincent reached out with a trembling hand and touched his son's shoulder. Barely a whisper of contact, terrified that if he pressed too hard, this dream would dissolve. Michael's eyes fluttered open. They were confused, unfocused. He looked at Vincent without recognition, like he was trying to place a stranger's face. "I'm sorry," Michael said softly, his voice rough from disuse. Do I know you?" Each word was a knife in Vincent's chest. His son was alive, breathing, real, and he didn't remember him at all. Vincent couldn't speak. Tears he'd held back for 3 years spilled down his face, and he didn't bother wiping them away. No, he finally managed, his voice breaking. Not anymore. But you did once. You knew me very well. Michael studied him with those familiar yet distant eyes. Sarah says I was in an accident. That they found me in the river. But I can't. He pressed a hand to his forehead in frustration. There's nothing there. Just pieces. Fragments that don't fit together. How long have you been here? Vincent asked, pulling a chair close to the bed. His mind was racing, trying to understand. Michael. He still thought of him as Michael, though he realized his son probably didn't even know that name. Looked uncertain. Sarah says 3 years. They found me washed up on a riverbank 20 miles downstream, unconscious. Severe head trauma. I was in a coma for 6 months. When I woke up, he trailed off, looking lost. Nothing. They couldn't identify me. No wallet, no ID. They called me John Doe. 3 years. His son had been alive, alone, lost in his own mind, while Vincent had been visiting an empty grave. The cruelty of it, the cosmic injustice, made him want to rage at something, anything. But there was also gratitude, fierce and overwhelming, because Michael was breathing. His heart was beating. He was alive. Why didn't they try harder to identify you? Vincent asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. Michael shrugged slightly. I'm not sure. Sarah says there were complications. Budget cuts, staff changes. I fell through the cracks. She's been paying for some of my care herself. He looked toward the door where Sarah had disappeared. She's kind. Brings me books, tells me stories. She said she'd been trying to figure out who I was for years. If this moment has touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. This story needs to be heard. Vincent stood, his mind made up. You're Michael Romano, he said firmly. You're my son, and I'm taking you home. But even as he spoke, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Heavy, official footsteps. Hospital security. Someone must have recognized him. Someone must have called. And Vincent realized that getting his son back wasn't going to be as simple as walking out the door. The door burst open before Vincent could react. 2 security guards and a hospital administrator. A stern woman with a clipboard clutched like a weapon. Mr. Romano, she said sharply, you need to leave immediately. You have no authorization to be in this patient's room. Vincent planted his feet, moving protectively between the bed and the intruders. Years of commanding rooms paid off. His presence alone made the guards hesitate. This is my son, he said, each word deliberate and hard as stone. I have every right to be here. The administrator's expression didn't soften. This patient's identity has never been confirmed. You can't simply claim... Vincent pulled out the photograph Sarah had given him, along with his phone, scrolling quickly to old family photos he'd never been able to delete. Look at them. Look at him, then and now. Same person. My son was declared dead 3 years ago after a car accident, but he's been here all along, and nobody bothered to look hard enough. His voice rose despite his efforts to control it. Where's your records department? Your intake files? Someone dropped the ball, and I want to know who and why. Behind him, Michael, John, to them, sat up slowly in bed, confusion and something else flickering across his face. Wait, he said quietly. Just wait a minute. Everyone turned to look at him. He was staring at Vincent with an intensity he hadn't shown before. When you came in, when I first saw you. He pressed his fingers to his temples. There was something, like a feeling, like I should know you. His voice grew stronger, and when you said that name, Michael, something moved in my head, like a door trying to open. The administrator's expression shifted from hostile to uncertain. Vincent seized the moment. Get a DNA test. Right now. I'll pay for it, rush it through. But while we're waiting for results, I'm not leaving this room. He looked at the security guards, and something in his eyes made them take an involuntary step back. This wasn't a threat. It was a simple statement of fact. I've spent 3 years believing my son was dead. I buried my wife next to his empty grave. If there's even a chance this is Michael, nothing short of the National Guard is moving me from this spot. The administrator glanced between Vincent, Michael, and the guards, clearly calculating. Finally, she nodded curtly. Dr. Shepard will need to authorize it, and you'll need to speak with our legal team about the circumstances of the patient's admission. She looked at Michael. John, or whoever you are, do you consent to a DNA test? Michael met Vincent's eyes across the room, and something passed between them. Some wordless recognition that transcended memory. Yes, he said softly. I want to know. After they left, Vincent sank into the chair beside the bed, suddenly exhausted. Michael was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice tentative. Sarah told me once that I had nightmares, that I'd wake up crying, saying names I didn't recognize in daylight. Maria was one of them. Vincent's head snapped up. One night, she said, I kept repeating, I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry. Over and over. Tears tracked down Michael's face, though his expression remained confused. I never knew what it meant. Vincent reached out and took his son's hand, gripping it firmly. The touch seemed to ground them both. Your mother's name was Maria, he said, his voice thick. She loved you more than life itself. When we thought you'd died, it killed her. Literally. Her heart gave out from grief. He paused, struggling. I need you to understand something. After you were both gone, I did things I'm not proud of. I'm not the same man you might remember. I'm not sure I'm a good man anymore. Michael squeezed his hand weakly. Sarah says good men don't exist in perfect form. She says we're all just trying our best with broken pieces. He smiled slightly. She's very wise, for someone who could barely afford to keep me supplied with decent books. Have you ever faced a moment where everything you believed was turned upside down? Let us know in the comments. The next hours crawled by. Sarah returned during her break, bringing Michael dinner and nodding respectfully at Vincent. Thank you, he told her quietly. For caring for him, for seeing what others missed. She brushed off the gratitude. I'm a nurse. It's what we do, but I'm glad you're here. He deserves to know who he is. Vincent made a mental note. This woman would be rewarded beyond measure. Whether she wanted it or not, night fell. Dr. Shepard came and went, drawing blood, promising results within 48 hours if Vincent paid for expedited testing. He would have paid 1,000,000 times that amount. As darkness filled the room, Vincent sat watching his son sleep, afraid that if he closed his own eyes, this fragile reality might disappear. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tonight, against all odds, he had hope. The DNA results came back in 36 hours. Vincent hadn't left Michael's side except to make necessary phone calls, arranging for the best neurologist in the country to consult on his son's case. When Dr. Shepard entered the room with a folder in her hands and a strange expression on her face, Vincent knew before she spoke. It's a match, she said simply. He's your son. The words hung in the air like a benediction. Michael, because he was Michael now, officially, undeniably, stared at his father with new eyes. So it's real, he whispered. I had a life, a family, a name. Vincent nodded, unable to speak around the lump in his throat. Dr. Shepard continued. The head trauma caused severe retrograde amnesia. His memories before the accident are likely gone, possibly permanently. However, with therapy and familiar environments, some patients do experience partial recovery. She looked between them kindly. Either way, you can make new memories now. But Vincent's relief was short-lived. The hospital administrator returned, this time with lawyers. There were questions about Michael's 3-year stay, about how he'd slipped through the system, about liability and responsibility. Vincent's own legal team countered every thrust, but the underlying issue remained. Someone had failed catastrophically. An unidentified patient with no family, no insurance, no advocate, except for one nurse with a kind heart and empty pockets. It was during one of these tense meetings that Vincent learned the full scope of Sarah Chen's sacrifice. She'd been supplementing Michael's care from her own modest salary for years. Books, better food, small comforts the hospital wouldn't provide. She'd spent her off hours researching facial recognition and missing persons databases, trying to find his family. When budget cuts threatened to transfer him to a state facility with even less resources, she'd fought the administration tooth and nail. Why? Vincent asked her later when they had a moment alone. Why did you care so much? You didn't know him. He was just another patient. Sarah smiled. That gentle, weary smile of someone who'd seen too much suffering and refused to become numb to it. My son died 20 years ago. she said quietly. Leukemia. He was 23, and I thought that if my boy had been lost and alone somewhere, I'd want someone to care for him. Someone to see him as a person, not just a case number. She wiped her eyes. Your son reminded me of my boy. Same gentleness, even with his mind so confused. I couldn't just walk away. Vincent did something then that would have shocked anyone who knew his reputation. He embraced her, this tired nurse with her worn scrubs and second-hand shoes. You gave me my son back, he said roughly. You have no idea what that means. What you mean. When he pulled back, he pressed an envelope into her hands. For everything you've lost. For everything you've given. It's not enough. Nothing could be enough. But it's a start. Sarah opened the envelope and gasped. Inside was a check that would clear her mortgage, pay off her debts, and fund her retirement. Mr. Romano, I can't... He held up a hand. Yes, you can. And you will. Because good people deserve good things, and the world's been upside down for too long. The next week was a whirlwind. Vincent hired the best memory specialists, moved Michael into his home, a place filled with photographs and familiar objects that might trigger recognition. He showed his son videos of his childhood, told him stories about Maria, played the music Michael had loved. Sometimes there were flickers, a smile at a particular song, a pause when looking at a photo. But mostly Michael remained politely interested, like someone learning about a stranger's life. It hurt. Vincent wouldn't pretend otherwise. To have his son back, but not really back. To know that Michael would never remember their shared history, their inside jokes, the man he used to be. It was a unique kind of grief. But it was also a second chance. He could be a better father this time. He could let go of the anger and violence that had defined him these past 3 years. He could honor Maria's memory by taking care of their son the way she would have wanted. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales that remind us hope is never truly lost. Vincent made other changes too. He began distancing himself from his criminal enterprises, delegating to lieutenants, planning an exit strategy. It would take time. You didn't just walk away from that world. But Michael's return had shown him that life could surprise you, that redemption was possible, that it was never too late to try to be good again. He visited Maria's grave one final Sunday, not to mourn anymore, but to thank her, to tell her their son was alive, to promise he'd take care of him. I'll be better, Maria, he whispered to the headstone. For him, for you, for the man I used to be. The morning sun broke through the clouds, warming his face, and for the first time in 3 years, Vincent Romano felt something other than pain. He felt purpose. Standing to leave, he noticed fresh white roses on the grave, not his usual offering. Tucked in the petals was a note in Michael's handwriting. To the mother I don't remember but somehow still miss. Vincent's vision blurred with tears. Maybe, just maybe, some memories lived deeper than the mind could hold. 6 months passed, each one bringing small victories and tender moments. Michael never did recover his memories. The neurologists eventually confirmed what Dr. Shepard had suggested, that the damage was permanent. But he learned who he'd been, and more importantly, he discovered who he wanted to become. He took to spending mornings in the garden Vincent's landscapers maintained, planting vegetables and flowers with a patience that surprised everyone. I don't know if I liked gardening before, he told his father one afternoon, dirt under his fingernails and genuine peace in his expression. But I like it now. It feels like growing things matters. Vincent found himself learning to be a father, all over again, this time to a son who was both familiar and entirely new. They developed their own rhythms and rituals. Breakfast together every morning, discussing the news or whatever book Michael was reading. Walks in the evening through the neighborhood, Michael pointing out birds or interesting architecture while Vincent listened, grateful for the simple gift of his son's voice. Movie nights on Fridays, usually old films that Michael might have seen before, but now experienced fresh, without the weight of previous opinions. There were hard days, too. Sometimes Michael would grow frustrated with the blank spaces in his mind, the phantom feeling of memories just out of reach. Sometimes Vincent would see a gesture or expression that was pure Maria, and the grief would rise up fresh and raw. They learned to sit with these difficult moments together, not trying to fix them, but simply acknowledging that loss and joy could exist in the same breath, that life was complicated and messy and beautiful all at once. Sarah Chen became part of their extended family, joining them for Sunday dinners that filled Vincent's previously quiet home with warmth and conversation. She'd retired from nursing, finally able to rest after decades of caring for others. She traveled a little, visited her grandchildren more often, and found herself smiling at unexpected moments. "You know," she told Vincent one evening, watching Michael teach her grandson how to identify constellations, "I spent so many years wondering if I made any difference. If all those double shifts and aching feet meant anything. And then there's this. One life saved that saved two more. Maybe that's enough." Vincent worked quietly behind the scenes to reform St. Catherine's Hospital's patient identification and care protocols. Anonymous donations funded a new tracking system, better staffing for the ward where Michael had languished, and a grant program for nurses who went above and beyond. He couldn't undo his son's 3 lost years, but he could make sure no other family suffered the same way. The hospital never knew the donations came from him, and he preferred it that way. Some good works were better done in silence. His exit from the criminal world took longer than he'd hoped, but proved cleaner than he'd feared. Vincent Romano, the feared boss, gradually faded into legend, replaced by Vincent Romano, the quiet philanthropist who funded youth programs and community centers in neighborhoods that needed them most. His old associates grumbled, but eventually accepted his transformation. Even hard men understood the power of a father's love for his son. Michael started volunteering at the library, reading to children during story hour. He had no memory of his mother doing the same thing years ago, but somehow the instinct remained, encoded deeper than conscious thought. One afternoon, Vincent stood in the back of the room, watching his son perform silly voices for a picture book, surrounded by giggling kids, and felt Maria's presence so strongly he could almost hear her laugh. She would have loved this. She would have been so proud of the man Michael was becoming. Memory or no memory, the headstone that had marked Michael's false grave was removed, replaced with a simple marker that now read, "Maria Romano, beloved wife and mother, forever in our hearts." Michael visited regularly, bringing flowers and talking to the mother he couldn't remember. "I tell her about my day," he explained to Vincent. "I like to think she can hear me, that somehow she knows I'm okay." Vincent put his arm around his son's shoulders. "She knows," he said with absolute certainty. "Trust me, son. She knows, and she's happy." One evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the growing darkness, Michael turned to his father with a question he'd been saving. "Do you miss him? The me I was before?" Vincent considered this carefully, wanting to be honest. "Sometimes," he admitted. "I miss the memories we can't share anymore. The history. But Michael," he looked at his son directly, "I'm grateful for who you are now. You're still kind, still thoughtful, still my son. We're just writing a different story than the one we started, and that's okay. That's life." Michael nodded slowly, then smiled. "I like our story. The second draft. It feels like we both got a second chance, you know? Not just me." Vincent felt his throat tighten with emotion. His son might not remember the past, but he understood the present with startling clarity. "Yeah," Vincent said softly. "Yeah, we did. If you enjoyed this story of hope, redemption, and second chances, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us it's never too late for love to find its way home. We'd love to hear from you." The fireflies continued their ancient dance, each small light a reminder that even in darkness, beauty persists. Vincent sat beside his son, no longer the feared mafia boss or the grieving father. but simply a man who'd learned that miracles sometimes come in whispered words from tired nurses, that love doesn't require memory to exist, and that home is anywhere your family stands beside you. The night settled around them, peaceful and complete, exactly as it should be.